style. Welcome to this volume of our video book, The Way to Cook. Some very special first courses and some of the great classic desserts. Here's the table of contents. Notice that each recipe has a reference number which will appear in the upper right-hand corner. This will make it possible for you to know exactly where you are moment by moment. Furthermore, these numbers correspond to the recipe numbers in the booklet that accompanies this tape. Let's begin. Begin with a real French pâté. That's a glorious mixture of meats and spices and wines, and it's absolutely delicious. It's baked and then served cold. Actually, it's a kind of a meatloaf, but a very fancy one. And you bake it in an earthenware tureen like this, or that's a metal one, or just a plain bread pan. I'm using a bread pan, and I'm lining it with fresh pork fat. These are thin sheets of fresh pork fat, and they just go into the mold, and you press it in. It's almost like as though you're putting dough into it, and that's how it looks. And to get the pork fat, you ask your supermarket butcher for thin sheets of fresh pork fat. You may have to order it ahead, and if you get too much, you can always freeze it. Now, here's the pâté mixture. I'm going to have 1.5 cups each of finely ground veal, finely ground pork, and fresh pork fat. Now that's 1 cup, 1/2 pound. And if you're on a diet, don't even think of a pâté, but you've got to have your pork fat or you're going to have a dry, tough pâté. And then to continue on, we have 1/2 cup of onions that have been sauteed in butter, and we have 2 eggs. That holds the pâté together. And I want about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. You're going to taste all of this before you cook it, so don't put in too much at once. Pepper. That was 12 grinds of pepper. A little bit of allspice. That's always good. That's about 1/8 teaspoon, and 1/2 teaspoon of very fresh smelling thyme. And then you want a little garnish for the meat mixture so that when you cut into it, it'll be attractive. I have 1/2 cup of chopped pistachios there. Or you could use truffles if you want. And then, this is the French touch, 2 or 3 tablespoons of very good port or Madeira or cognac, and a clove of garlic. And then that's all to be mixed up. You can do that either by hand or do it in a machine. Well, that machine does a wonderful job of mixing. Now, I have to taste this very carefully for seasoning, but it's got raw pork in it, and that's dangerous to eat. So I'm going to have to cook this little sample before I taste it for seasoning. Now I'm going to cook that 2 or 3 minutes on each side, then let it cool off, and I'll taste it. Now that's cooled off enough, I'll just take a little taste. Pretty good. But here's a tip. Since ultimately this pâté is going to be served cold, the flavors get muted unless they're very intense and carefully made at this point. So add whatever is needed, and then you're ready to go. So here's our lined mold, and I'm just going to put about 1/3 of that mixture right in there. Another tip, wet your hands so that it's easier to spread. And then I could fill it all just with this plain mixture like this, but what I'm going to do is to have strips of marinated duck meat. That's just been marinated in salt, pepper, a little bit of spice. And then I've got some strips of cold boiled ham. And rather than duck, you could use veal or rabbit or wild boar or whatever you happen to have around the house. Now another layer of the meat mixture. Now there's a second layer of ham and duck. Here's my last little piece of duck. Then we get the final layer of meat mixture. Again, spreading it with my wet hands. Now, one final thing, a bay leaf on top, and then fold the fat over. As you notice, we've got fat surrounding this pate, and that prevents it from crusting over, and it also bastes it. And then it needs a cover, so I'm going to use a piece of foil, and that's now ready to bake. Note that I'm baking this in a water bath, a bain-marie, and the water doesn't come near the edge of the aluminum foil. I'm doing it in a water bath because I want it to cook gently. And the oven is set at 350 degrees, and I'll come back in about an hour and a half and check it with my meat thermometer, which should read 162 degrees. Now, after the pate is cooked and is out of the oven, let it cool off for an hour. Here's how it looks. You see all these juices in here. And now we have one final very important step, which is to compact the meat so there'll be no air holes and you can slice it easily. So put the cover back on, and you want to weight it down with something. I have a twin bread pan which nests in there to press the meat down, and then a weight of any kind, like some canned goods, 3 to 4 pounds, and then refrigerate that for at least a day. Now, if you've baked your pate in a handsome tureen like this, bring the dish right to the table and serve from that. Or unmold the pate and cut it into beautiful big slices. Serve it with little cornichon pickles and fresh French bread. However you slice it, a pate makes a marvelous first course. Fish mousse is a marvelous candidate as a first course because it's elegant, yet it's light. In the old days, you wouldn't think of doing it because it was so cumbersome. You had a great big mortar and you pounded the fish in that. Then there was a great big drum sieve and you had to rub it all through the sieve. After about 2 hours of work, you had a little bowl of fish, and then you had to wash out the sieve. That's no fun. With a food processor, everything is so easy. Here's how to do it. I've got 2 1/4 cups of fillet of sole in there, and to give a little extra body, I have 3/4 cup of either raw shrimp or raw scallops. I have shrimp in there. Then I always like it with fresh white breadcrumbs. I've got 1 1/2 cups of them, and 1 egg, and I'm going to have about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. That's exactly 1.5 teaspoons, and there are 9 grinds of pepper, and 1 1/2 cups of very heavy, fresh, chilled cream, and a little bit of nutmeg. I almost forgot that. That gives it a little je ne sais quoi flavor. And then let her rip. Now, that's the right consistency. It's holding its shape softly. Then take a little taste of it. And if it needs any more salt, pepper, or anything else, add it. Now that's your basic mousse mix. And you can use it to fill a little individual mousse like that, lined with little strips of smoked salmon, but I'm going to do it in a nice, big, heavily buttered ring mold. And with this mousse, you can make all kinds of things, like a great big charlotte mold, or you can use sausage casings and make fish dogs. It's a very universal mix. Now, just like the pate, I'm going to bake this in a water bath, and to keep it moist and protected, I'm covering it with buttered wax paper. I've got it in a 350-degree oven. It's going to take about 45 minutes to cook, so I'm starting it an hour before I want to serve. Now that's all baked, and I'm just loosening it from the ring mold. It has a wonderful smell. You can always tell when it's done because it begins to smell deliciously fishy. Now I have a buttered platter here. We're going to unmold that, and you'll see why it's buttered. You see, if I didn't get that quite evenly on the platter, it slips around because it's buttered. There we are, beautifully unmolded. And I'm going to fill it with a little creamed lobster. Doesn't that look good? Going to have sauce on top and lobster in the middle. Woo, look at those two mousses. This little baby one with its strips of salmon and a buttery watercress sauce. And here is our noble ring mold filled with creamy lobster meat. Either one is a 3-star beginning to any meal. Every good cook should know how to make a respectable pastry crust dough. That's for pies and quiches and tarts. And I think in the old way, when you did it all by hand, your hands were hot and it took a long time and the pastry got sticky and it turned out like cardboard. But I think if you use one of these machines, in this method, it's going to work out very well. The first thing is measuring the flour. This is all-purpose flour, and if you use unbleached flour, you're going to have a tenderer crust. There's 1 cup, and notice how I measure, and I'm dipping the cup into the flour, sweeping it off level. These are dry measure cups. These are very important because you want to get your measurements accurate. So there's 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Now here's another thing for tenderness, which is cake flour. That's plain bleached cake flour. I want 1/2 cup of that, because that's a soft flour, and that's going to make for a tenderer crust. And now we have a very important thing is chilled butter. 2½ sticks, 10 ounces of chilled butter cut into small pieces. And I have 4 tablespoons of chilled white vegetable shortening. That is, again, for tenderness. And half a teaspoon of salt. And a big pinch, that's about 1/8 of a teaspoon of sugar, and that will help brown the crust. And then on goes the machine, top. And you just want to mix the flour and butter together with little pulses. That was 6 pulses. And now we have the water, and this is going to be, I'm going to start with 2/3 cup of iced water. And again, I'm going to pulse it in. Come. That's 1/3 cup, 2/3 cup. Now take a look at it. I just want it to begin to mass. I don't want it to form a ball. That's about 3 more tablespoons of water. And now out it comes, and this is going to be the part that's called the great smear. See, that's very rough looking now, but if I hold it in my fist, it holds together. So that looks very sort of rough and weird. That's just the way I want it. So I press it together with my hands, and now with the heel of my hand, not the palm, because the heel is not hot, I push it out into a 6-inch smear. And this acts as the final blending of fat and flour. And then gather this together in a cake. And then it must kind of rehydrate itself and rest for at least 2 hours before you form it. And that's going to be chilled in the refrigerator, wrapped in plastic. Tonight I'm going to have a perfectly beautiful, glittering, fresh apple tart for dessert. And I have this lovely buttery dough that I made yesterday, chilling in the refrigerator, and it's all ready to go. It's necessary to chill it because it relaxes it. And also if it's too soft, you can't work with it. If it's too hard, you can't either. So I'm going to beat it into submission. Now that's malleable enough, and I've really actually managed to roll it out quite a bit. Now I'm going to really roll it out into a circle because I'm going to make a round tart. Now there's a little bit of flour, and sprinkle that very lightly on the bottom and on your rolling surface and on the dough, because you don't want the dough to stick, and you don't want to add too much flour because you'll dry out the dough. You use just enough to keep it from sticking. And now start rolling. And then keep turning the dough and making sure that it's not going to stick on the bottom. And that turning prevents you from allowing it to stick, because if it started sticking, you'd never get anywhere. And now notice here, I'm starting not at the edge, but I'm leaving about an inch, and then I'm rolling not quite to the edge, because you want to have an even thickness all around. And you want to roll as quickly as you can, because if the dough softens, you've had it. You can't do anything with it. And if it begins to soften, immediately refrigerate it for 20 minutes and then continue. Also, please notice this rolling pin. It's about a rolling surface of 18 inches long. If you have a little something like this, you're just never going to succeed at all. It would be better to use a broom handle than a silly little pin like that. I'm just sprinkling a tiny bit of flour on there, just want to make sure nothing sticks. This is less than 1/8 of an inch thick, and I think this is just about right. I'm going to form it in this pan here, which is buttered, but I want it to be about 1 inch larger all around, so I have my trusty pizza pan, which I will use as a template. I'm just going to cut that all around. And I have some nice scraps of dough here, which I can use to make appetizers out of or something else. There we are. And now here's how to get the dough into the pan. Fold it in half, then fold it in a quarter, and then put the point of that in the center of the pan so that when you unfold it, it'll be nicely centered. Now, I want the sides here to be thick enough so that they will hold up during baking. So I'm taking a little bit of dough, and I'm taking the dough and I'm pushing it down against the sides, and that makes them thicker. So I do that all around. And now that's, as you can see, that's a kind of a ruffled interior, which is just fine. I'm just going to take my pin and roll over that and roll off any excess. Then I'm going to even it out by pressing it against the sides, and also that raises it up so it'll be a little bit higher. Now this isn't really necessary, but it's kind of nice just to make a little decorative edge there with the back of a knife. Now this is a very important step. I'm pricking the bottom of the pastry with the tines of a table fork, and that will help prevent the bottom from rising, because it would be awful to have it balloon up. Now if I bake this shell immediately, it could very well bake out of shape. The dough needs to relax, and the best way to do that is to chill it for half an hour. Or if I didn't want it right away, I could wrap and freeze it. Now that shell has nicely chilled and rested, and you'd think that it would be about time for me to bake the tart, but it's not yet ready. This is in the interest of having a crisp crust. It has to be pre-baked. But if I pre-bake it empty and naked, the sides are going to fall and the bottom is going to puff up. So the solution is to take a piece of buttered foil and very gently press that in against the edges. And then it has to be weighted down, so I have this collection of dried beans, which I've had for about 15 years. Press them against the sides, and then you pre-bake it. It's going into a 450 oven for 10 minutes. There we are. That's all ready. As you can see, the bottom has set, so it's not going to be soggy. After 10 minutes, I took out the foil and beans. I can now use them again for the next tart. And then I pricked it again and left it in for 2 more minutes. And now, this is being an apple tart, I want to give a little flavor to the bottom of the shell and the apples. And this is 1 cup of apricot jam that was pushed through a sieve and then boiled down until it was rather thick like this with 2 tablespoons of sugar. You have to use this while it's still warm. There'd be no French pastry without apricot glaze, that's for sure. Now to the apples. You want apples that'll hold their shape. like Granny Smith's or Golden's. I happen to be using Granny Smith's here. And now we want to cut it so that all the slices stay together. So I'm making very careful slices down there, the length of the apple. These are apples that are peeled and cored, as you see. I forgot to tell you that. Now, I want to cut it into a slightly wedge shape so it's going to fit into the tart, looking like an apple half. There, so I've just cut a little bit off the side. Now I'm going to spread it out. You just take your hand and spread it out like that, and lift it up, and it goes to the tart. Isn't that neat? Now I have these little leftover pieces where I made the wedges. I'm just going to put these in the interstices. A little bit in the middle. Now we want to sprinkle that with a little bit of sugar. I've got maybe 2 tablespoons there. It depends on your apples. And that's now ready to bake. Now this goes into a 450 degree oven for 20 minutes. Then you turn it down to 400 and bake it 20 minutes more, just until the apples are tender. Here's our beautiful apple tart, all baked, and I'm making it glitter with this same apricot glaze. Here's another idea, a fresh strawberry tart, nicely glazed. Or, for high tea, little barquettes filled with fresh fruits. Or how about some little appetizers, little baby quiches, and all of these beautiful things made out of the same pastry dough. The most versatile edibles in the cooking world is the crepe. Paper thin, delicate. You can do so many things with it. Here's how to make them. I have in this bowl 1 cup of that rather sandy instant flour, which I like to use because it doesn't lump up when you add liquids to it. And to make it very light, I'm going to start with 2/3 cup of water. Beat that up. You see how easily that blends in. Then I want 2/3 cup of milk. And while I'm stirring it, I'm going to add in a nice pinch of salt. And then I have 3 tablespoons of melted butter. And then just because I like the taste, I'm going to put in 2 or 3 drops of dark sesame oil. You don't have to put it in at all. And now I have 3 whole eggs. These are large eggs. And just beat that all up. And then you want to let that rest for 10 minutes. And the reason for that is that you want the flour particles to swell and absorb the liquid. Here's the batter, nicely rested. You could make it well ahead and keep it in the fridge for several hours. And I'm going to make this in a no-stick pan. And this has a diameter of 6.5 inches, and that determines the size of the crepe. You could make them bigger if you wanted. Now I want to make sure the pan is hot, so the water is dancing on it. That ought to be all right. And I have just a little measure here that I'm using as a label. And I'm just going to pour enough into the pan here just to film the bottom. And you see I'm turning the pan all around. And how much batter you put in determines the thickness of your crepe. Then I'm just going to wait there for about a minute until the bottom is browned nicely. Now that looks as though the bottom had browned. Just lift it up. Oh, that looks very nice. Now I can flip it. I'm just going to flip it by sort of loosen it first by shaking it, and then pong, there it goes. And then it only needs about half a minute on the other side. And the other side just never browns very much. It's just a spotty brown. So you consider this outside the public side. So out it goes. And I think it's a good idea to let them cool on a rack, and then you can stack them very nicely and just continue on. Now here's a very nice dish that you can make with crepes. This is filled crepes as a very nice first course. Now I have some cooked chopped spinach and some sautéed mushrooms here mixed with a little white sauce. I'm just putting that down on the lower third of the crepe. Just roll that up. And then I have a baking dish here that's buttered, and I have a little white sauce in that, our usual bechamel, with a bit of sprinkling of a little cheese on top of that, and in go the crepes. You notice the folded side is down. And then here's a little more of my sauce, and a bit goes over on the top of each crepe. Now, all nicely covered with sauce. Now here's a little more grated Swiss cheese to go onto the top. And this is now really all ready for the oven, but the nice thing about it is you can prepare it several hours ahead, cover it and refrigerate it, and bake it when you're ready. I'm going to bake this right now. Now I'm going to bake this in a preheated 375-degree oven. It'll take 25 to 30 minutes in the upper third level, and you bake it until it's nice and bubbling and the top is browned lightly. Don't overcook it. Crepes filled with spinach and mushrooms, gratinade with cheese. That's a savory first course. You know, crepes make wonderful desserts, and they can be very simple too. You can just fill them with fresh berries and sugar, or just butter and sugar. I think one of the great desserts is crepes with orange butter flamed in cognac. In other words, crêpe Suzette. And I'm making the orange butter now, and what you want to do is just to have the zest of the orange zest, just the peel without any of the white, because that has all the essential oils in it. Then I'm going to grind these up in the food processor. And of course, you have thoroughly washed your orange. And then I'm going to have half of a cup of sugar, and in it goes. You want to do that for about a minute until you feel that you've gotten all the oil and essence out of the peel, and you can it has a wonderful smell. And now I'm going to put in 2 sticks of unsalted butter. That's thoroughly blended. I'm going to put in a little very, very good orange liqueur, about 3 tablespoons full. And now a little bit of fresh orange juice. I want to be very careful that the butter doesn't separate it. So it'll be about half a cup. There. That's all there is to it. Look at that beautiful butter, and it just look at that. It just tastes and smells so good. That's all ready. You can do that way ahead of time. Now the great moment of drama approaches. The guests have enjoyed their saddle of veal. The room is beautifully candlelit. The flame is lit. On goes the chafing dish. And in goes the butter. And now this butter has to boil down and almost caramelize. And that's going to take about 5 minutes. So you have to have some wonderful things to say for 5 minutes, like the last time you were in Monte Carlo, or when crêpes Suzette were invented, but you just have to entertain everyone for 5 minutes. Now, everyone has told his favorite story about crêpes Suzette trying to top the last one. And look at the syrup now. That really is a syrup, so it is now ready to bathe the crepes in this beautiful ambrosia. So you just turn them in it, baste it with it, and then fold it into wedges. And you just continue this way until all the crepes are done. Now, ready for the fireworks. First, sprinkle on a tablespoon of sugar. And then pour in a 1/4 cup of very fine orange liqueur. Notice I'm using a separate pan. I'm not pouring it directly in because it is much safer this way. And now a 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup of very, very fine French cognac. In that goes. And wait till it's really bubbling, which it now is. It's got to be hot, and then dip that into the flames. And there it goes. Now, fearlessly step up to the plate and baste the crepes. And baste them. And keep on basting them until both the flames and the applause subside. Now let's turn our attention to cake. I'm going to begin with the classic Genoise. It's one of the most important cakes because it is the gateway to wedding cakes, to filled cakes of all types, and to petit fours. It's a very natural cake. It doesn't have any chemicals in it. It doesn't have baking powder. It rises on egg power alone. And it is tricky. It can flop on you, so that really every step you've got to watch. Let's begin with the eggs. It's a whole egg cake. Those are 4 whole large eggs and 2/3 cup of sugar. Now these have to be beaten until they've tripled in volume. You can do it either with a high-tech machine like this with a properly designed bowl, a properly designed beater, or you can do it in the good old-fashioned classic way. Whichever way you do, you have to warm the eggs in hot water first. I'm going to start the classic way, and it's very important that you keep the whole eggs in motion at once. And you can either use a big balloon whip and a bowl into which the beater really just fits, or you can use a handheld electric mixer like this. And this is the method you use with the handheld beater. You want to keep all the eggs in motion at once. Whatever method you use for beating the eggs is going to take them 8 to 10 minutes. The advantage of the table model machine is that you can do something else while it's beating. First thing to do is to preheat your oven to 350 degrees and then put the rack in the lower third. And then prepare your cake pan. This is a 6-cup cake pan, 9 by 1.5 inches. And it has to be buttered first. And this happens to be no stick, but that doesn't make any difference. I butter it anyway. Then here's a smooth piece of wax paper which goes in the bottom. That also gets buttered. Be sure that you get the butter all over the insides of the pan. And now it has 2 or 3 tablespoons of flour. Doesn't make any difference whether that's cake flour or all-purpose flour. And then you do this movement to coat it with the flour, and then you knock out excess. There, your pan is now ready. Next item is the flour, and this must be measured with absolute accuracy. This is 1/3 cup of plain bleached cake flour into a sifter. Is 1/2 cup of plain bleached cake flour into the sifter. And then, to help prevent lumps, there is 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar. And now, for flavor, there's a big pinch of salt. And then sift that onto wax paper. Now return the flour to the sifter. Here I've got some melted butter. You notice there's that white sort of milky residue below. I don't want that. I just want 1/4 cup or 4 tablespoons of clear melted butter in this little bowl. And now let's take a look at those eggs. See how the beater's leaving real traces there. I think that's about done. At this point, I'm going to put in 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Let that run a little bit longer. Now let's see how it looks. It should leave big, thick. You see, that's a very fat ribbon that holds up. You see that really has tripled in volume. This is now ready. Now we have the melted butter, and I also have the flour, and I'm going to start sifting and folding in the flour. This is very important, that you want to fold in the flour in such a way that you do not deflate the egg whites. Now there's the last of the flour. You don't want to overmix, but you want to try and be sure that you've got it all in. And now, very important point, you have your melted butter that is cool. I'm putting a big plop of the egg mixture in that, and then folding that together. And the reason for this is you don't want the butter to sink down to the bottom of the batter. And by mixing some of the batter into the butter, it gives it a little more body so that it'll hold in the batter without sinking down. So in that goes. Then this very delicately gets folded in. And then you immediately, as soon as it's folded in, immediately it goes into the pan. Now, run the batter up to the edge all the way around. And then immediately to the oven. I'm just going to bang it a little bit to settle it. Then into the oven. There, my oven is up to temperature, 350 degrees. In it goes. And it'll take 30 to 35 minutes, but I'm going to keep my eye on it. That ought to be done. It's been just a little over 30 minutes, and here's how to tell. It rose up a little bit, then it began to sink down, and you feel it. The top is springy. You can see it pulls away from the sides of the pan. That is done, and it should now cool for, 20 minutes or so until you unmold it. Now that's cooled enough, and I think it should be ready to unmold. It usually shrinks a little bit from the sides of the pan. If necessary, take a little knife and run carefully all around. In this case, it's a no-stick pan, so that should not be necessary. So put the rack on, reverse the tool, give it a little shake. There, that's unmolded very nicely. And now the paper will have adhered to the bottom, so just peel that off. And then you want to let that cool completely, 2 or 3 hours. Then you're ready to fill it, or you can freeze it. Now let's decorate the genoise. In this kind of a cake, when you fill it, you split it in half and then put in the filling, and you make a little wedge up the side so that when you reform it, you line up the two sides of the wedge. Then you can eat the wedge and start splitting the cake. And I find it easiest to start doing it and then keep rotating it around, and then I get it somewhat even. You want to be sure that you have a long, sharp knife for this kind of a thing. There. Now just turn it over. I've got it quite. There. And now, to give it a perfectly delicious flavor, I'm going to give it a little liqueur syrup. This is half a cup of water and a quarter of a cup of sugar dissolved. Then I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of nice dark rum, and then sprinkle that over each half of the cake. Now we've got to have some whipped cream for the cake. And you're never going to have any trouble with whipped cream if you whip it over a bowl of ice like this, and you have a metal bowl that will chill. And if you're sure that you've bought whipping cream or heavy cream, be sure to look at the label. And then whipped cream should double in volume, so it does not work well in a standard mixture that doesn't beat enough air into it. You can beat it either with a great big balloon whip like this, or with an electric mixer like this. And you want to circulate that around in the bowl and beat in as much air as possible. It's going to take 4 or 5 minutes. Well, that's about 2.5 minutes. I want to show you this first stage of whipped cream. This is known as chantilly, And if you're serving it with fresh fruits or on fresh fruit tarts, this is perfect. I want it a little stiffer because it's going on a cake. You see how much stiffer that is? That's what I have to have that like that for filling the cake. And now we want to sweeten it with I'm going to put in about half a cup of powdered sugar. Sifting it in. If you don't sift it, you'll get lumps. There, that's enough sugar. Now I want a little bit of pure vanilla extract. I'm going to put in about a good teaspoon there. And then fold that in. That looks lovely. And now we're ready to fill the cake. There, that's the beginning of the decoration. Note, I have this bottom layer of cake on my serving platter with pieces of wax paper I can slip out, so I'm not going to get the platter all messed up. Then just spread that around. It doesn't make a difference if it dribbles a little bit over the sides because it's all going to be iced on the outside. And then there's some beautiful fresh sliced strawberries macerated in sugar with a little bit of rum. And now the top layer goes on. Note, there's the wedge, so that I line them up. And I'm just going to lay that lightly over, not pressing it down. And now, whipped cream all over, bottom and sides. There, I think that looks very nice, and I think some rosettes would be very attractive, and for that you want a pastry bag. And be sure when you buy it, you've got a flexible vinyl bag, and this is a large star tube. And then you want to fold the tube over a little bit on itself so that your cream is not going to fall out of your bag, and put it in a big cup, open it up nicely, and in goes the cream. And by the way, if the cream is softened too much, whip it up a little bit, because you have to have it stiff for rosettes. There we are. And just push that down. And your grip is like this. You twist the bag around, then hold on to it, and oomph. There you are. Now you and I know that under these beautiful fresh strawberries, under these peaks of perfectly whipped cream, lies a cake of quality and distinction, the noble Genoise. Let's make a trifle. It's made out of cake and jam and custard and whipped cream and sherry and cognac. You want to serve it in a glass dish like this because you want to see what's going on. And as for the cake, it can be any kind of cake. I just happen to have an old Genoise around here, so that's what we're going to use. You cut it in half and you spread one half with raspberry jam, like that. And then you arrange these wedges in your glass dish, pressing them together. I think that trifle was actually an English dessert first, but it's now become universal. And now, you can see why this is sometimes called a tipsy pudding. That has 1.5 cups of very best sherry. And then just to beef it up, you want to have a little bit of cognac. I have exactly 1/3 cup of cognac in there. And you let that steep, and while it's steeping, you make a custard sauce. This sauce is also known as crème anglaise, or English custard. I'm going to make about 3 cups, and I have 10 egg yolks in there. And that's going into a nice stainless pan. And then very gradually I'm going to beat in 1 cup of sugar, and you want to do it gradually because if you pour the whole thing in, you can turn the egg yolk slightly granular. So just do a little bit at a time. Now that's all in. Now you want to continue beating this for a minute or so until it turns a pale yellow and thickens. And I don't know why this is, but it does prepare the egg yolks for the ordeal of heat to come. Now you always want to do this by hand because you don't want it to turn foamy or you'll get into trouble. Now that is ready, so now we're going to have hot milk that's getting beaten into it. And this milk, I've steeped in it 2 little lemon peels and a bay leaf just to give it a nice taste. And now the milk very gradually gets beaten in just by little dribbles. If it goes in too fast, you'll scramble the yolks. There. Now you want to set that over moderate heat, and you're going to stir very slowly with a wooden spoon. And you have perfect control over it because you can take it on and off the heat. If you try and do it over simmering water, it's going to take you all day. But what you're trying to do is make the sauce thicken, but you don't want it to come to the boil or you will scramble the egg yolk. So you just keep your eye on it all the time and keep lifting it on and off the heat if you think it's getting too hot. Another thing to do is to take your impeccably clean finger, put it in the sauce, and test it. When it's really too hot for your finger, it's almost done. Know that there's just a little wisp of steam coming up there. That means it's getting near the end. And look at the surface. The foam is beginning to subside. It's very close to being done. This crème anglaise is a very important sauce in desserts because it's the base for many ice creams, for Bavarian creams, sauces for puddings. So it's something everybody should know how to make without fear. Now at this point, watch very, very carefully, taking it on and off heat. And we want to wait until it thickly coats the spoon. It's almost there. Now at this point, you could use it as a custard sauce. You see, it's really very definitely coating the spoon. I'm going to go a little bit farther because I want it to thicken up quite a bit for my trifle. Now you see that is really very thick. If I lift it up, draw my finger across, it makes almost ridges in the spoon. So stir that vigorously to cool it down and stop the cooking. Now that is cooled to tepid, and it gets a little shot of vanilla, about 1 tablespoon pure vanilla extract. That all gets stirred in. Things always have vanilla in them. I don't know why, but that's the way of it, the way of life. And now I'm going to strain it over the custard. Over the cake. I don't want too much in. You see, you're always going to have a few little lumps in there because you've cooked it so hard, and then the egg white lumps a little bit anyway, and I think that is enough. And now I want to chill it in the refrigerator so it will set. That'll take 2 or 3 hours, and then I'm going to cover it with whipped cream, and it'll be all ready to eat. The only thing I've never understood about this beautiful dessert is, why do they call it a trifle? Here's my all-time favorite chocolate cake. It's called the Queen of Sheba, La Reine de Saba. It's made of chocolate and almonds, and it's just beautiful. This is the chocolate I use. Part sweet chocolate, which is sometimes called semi-sweet, and part unsweetened chocolate, which is sometimes called bitter chocolate. I don't know why they don't get together on this, but they don't. I have 4.5 ounces of semi-sweet or sweet chocolate and 1.5 ounces of bitter chocolate. I think that just gives a better flavor. Then I'm going to melt it with 3 tablespoons of very strong coffee. You can use instant coffee, 1 tablespoon per 3 tablespoons of water. Cover the pan, and then you've got to be very careful melting chocolate. If the water's too hot, the chocolate can lump out. So I have hot but not simmering water. I put the pan in there, tightly covered, and in about 5 minutes it will be melted. During that time I can finish off the rest of my ingredients. Here's half a cup of blanched almonds, whether they're whole or slivered, it doesn't make any difference. I'm going to pulverize them in my machine. If I pulverize them as is, the nut oils would lump up. So I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar, and that should keep them nice. Now that's exactly right. Now I'm going to preheat the oven. Now I'm going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. The cake is going to bake in a 9-inch pan, bottom lined with wax paper. It's been buttered and floured. And now, preliminaries done, going to start the batter. I have in here 1½ sticks of unsalted butter. And I'm going to cream that with 3/4 cup of sugar. Now 5 egg yolks. That's ready. Now I have to have 5 stiffly beaten egg whites. These are at room temperature, and here we go. Now you see that has been beaten to soft peaks. And at this point we beat in 2 tablespoons of sugar and beat until they're stiff, shining peaks, and you stand right over them at this point. Now let's test them and see how they are. Those are stiff, shining peaks. You see, they're standing up. And at this point now, you finish off the batter. Now the chocolate is perfectly melted and smooth, so in that goes into the egg yolks. Stir that up, and then in go our powdered almonds, and just a little bit of almond extract, which is needed, but not too much. I always use the little cap. That's about 1/8 of a teaspoon, maybe. And as usual, a little vanilla. I'm going to put in a teaspoonful there. And stir that all up. You don't want to ever stop when you get to this point. There, mix that up nicely. And now to lighten the batter, a big dollop of the egg whites. This is so the egg whites will very nicely mix in with the batter. There they go. And now start folding them in and then alternate with the flour. We have 3/4 cup of cake flour here that has been sifted with a tablespoon of sugar and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. You always want some salt when you're doing a chocolate cake. It brings out the flavor. Well, that's now ready to go into the pan. Now run it up to the side and rim of the pan all around, and it's ready for the oven. Now the oven is at 350 degrees. The rack is in the lower middle. I'm going to come back in 25 minutes. Now I'm going to make some chocolate decorations for the top of the cake. This is plain melted chocolate. There's no liquid in it, and I'm spreading it out onto a sheet of heavy plastic, and then I'm going to let it harden. Now I'm just going to slide this into the fridge. Now, 25 minutes has gone by. I'm going to test it for doneness. A toothpick should come out clean when you get to the edges, but when you put it into the center, there should be a few little speckles of chocolate on it, because you don't want to overcook it. I'm now going to let it rest for 20 minutes. Now my cake is cooled off and I'm icing it. You notice it's on its platter, and the platter is protected with pieces of wax paper. And the icing is 3 ounces of chocolate melted with 1.5 tablespoons of coffee, and then 6 tablespoons of soft, unsalted butter have been beaten in. Now here's that sheet of chocolate all hardened nicely in the refrigerator, and here's what I'm going to do with it. That peels right, you can see that peels right off, and I'm just going to break it into rough pieces and then just lay it on the cake. Don't you think that's rather slick and nice? You don't have to be fancy with this. We saw it in Paris when we were there the last time, and I thought that was a pretty slick thing to do, and it's so easy. Chocolate on chocolate on chocolate on chocolate and more chocolate to top it off. Here she is, the new improved Queen of Sheba. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video book all about first courses and desserts, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this 6-part series we call The Way to Cook. This is Julia Child. Bon appetit.